You're not just obstructing justice, Your Honor. You're participating in it. His gavel slammed. You're out of line. No, sir. I'm exactly where the line is. You just crossed it. Then I pulled it out. A recorder. The courtroom froze. Now the court knows exactly what you're hiding. He stood up, red-faced. This hearing is over. No, Your Honor, you don't get to silence the court just because the evidence leads to you. Judge Sterling Marsh, you are under arrest. Have you ever been judged, abused by authority, discriminated against, or had your dignity and self-worth completely stripped away? Let me tell you my story. A story that, somewhere in this world, still happens far too often. Leave a comment with the number 9 so I know you're with me and ready to hear what I have to share. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe so you won't miss any of the intense moments ahead. If you are deaf or have trouble hearing, please turn on the subtitles. We created them especially for you because you matter. This is Radio from Hine, the #1 YouTube channel for justice and equality for everyone, standing strong against racism and discrimination. Wishing you a peaceful day. They told me to prepare for anything, but they didn't tell me to prepare for this. The courtroom was cold, not just the air, though that too, but the kind of cold that lives in the walls, the floors, the eyes watching you from every corner. I walked in steady, heels silent on polished tile, my case file pressed close to my chest. I had rehearsed my opening in my head 100 times, every word, every breath, every pause, but all of that went quiet the moment I saw him. Judge Sterling Marsh, older, white, crown of gray hair, heavy eyes that had sentenced hundreds without blinking, and lips curled in permanent disapproval, as if the very concept of fairness offended him. He didn't rise when I entered. Of course, he didn't have to, but he didn't look up either, just sat there, flipping slowly through the papers in front of him like this case, my case, was some minor annoyance interrupting his day. The bailiff called for silence. I took my seat at the plaintiff's table. My client wasn't here. It wasn't that kind of hearing. Just me, just him, just the truth trying to claw its way through a system built to suffocate it. A hush spread across the gallery. I could feel the weight of it, the anticipation, the doubt. Then, finally, he spoke. Miss Langley, Judge Marsh said, still not looking up. Let's hope you're not wasting my time like most of your kind do. I blinked. The words didn't register at first. They landed like a slap without a sound. I scanned the room, hoping someone else heard it wrong, but I saw it in their faces. The quick inhale from a woman in the third row, the widened eyes of a reporter scribbling furiously, the smirk of the defense attorney. He knew what he said. He meant what he said. I straightened my spine. Your Honor, I said evenly, I've come prepared to present evidence of serious financial misconduct by the defendant's firm, including the unlawful redirection of over $2 million in state infrastructure funds. His hand waved lazily in the air. Let's just skip ahead to the part where you grandstand, he said. I'm not in the mood for lectures from social justice warriors today. Another ripple through the gallery. Someone chuckled. I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I had learned years ago, coming up through law school while being the only black woman in most rooms, that people like Sterling Marsh didn't want a debate. They wanted domination. The only way to win was to never let them see the crack. I opened my folder, kept my voice calm. Then I'll let the exhibits speak for themselves. Finally, he looked at me, just briefly, long enough to let me see the disdain in his eyes. It wasn't about this case. It wasn't about the facts. It was about me, Asha Langley, a black woman standing where he didn't think I belonged. He leaned back in his chair, laced his fingers together, and tilted his head. Tell me something, Miss Langley, he said. Do you enjoy wasting taxpayer resources on conspiracy theories, or is this just a hobby? I felt the pressure rising behind my ribs, the fury, the disbelief, but I swallowed it. This case involves verifiable transactions in internal communications, the documents submitted to the court. Spare me, he said, waving his hand again. I don't need to be drowned in paperwork just to justify your presence here. That was the moment I realized. He wasn't just skeptical, he was threatened. By my presence, by my voice, by the idea that I might actually have the power to expose something real. But I stayed still, professional, collected. I could feel every eye on me, measuring, waiting to see if I'd falter. That's the unspoken rule when you're black and female in these rooms. You don't just represent yourself. You represent everyone they think you can't be. So I didn't flinch. I didn't stammer. I didn't rise to his bait. I simply said, Your Honor, if I may proceed with presenting the timeline of discrepancies found in the defendant's fiscal reports. He cut me off. I said, he interrupted, his voice sharper now. We're not here to indulge your fantasy of relevance. If you can't get to the point, then don't waste this court's time. My throat tightened, but I didn't let it show. This wasn't new. This wasn't even surprising. But it was the first time I felt it this raw, this open, this deliberate. It wasn't just judicial bias. It was an attack. He wanted me humiliated. He wanted the headlines to read, Black lawyer collapses under pressure. But that wasn't going to happen. Not today. Not in this courtroom. I picked up the first document and slid it toward the clerk. This is Exhibit A, a city planning contract with the stated project budget. Then I placed a second document beside it, and this is the wire transfer, dated 1 month later. Nearly triple the amount, same project. No council approval. For a split second, his jaw tensed, and that's when I knew I wasn't just hitting a nerve, I was getting close. He leaned forward, just slightly. Miss Langley, he said, voice lowering just enough to carry weight, if this is your idea of evidence, then maybe you should reconsider your career. Or better yet, stick to defending low-level criminals where you belong. I paused. The air changed. Even the defense attorney stopped smiling. I stared at him, not blinking, not breathing, because that's what they never expect. They expect anger. They expect tears. They expect you to break. But I didn't. I just smiled, a cold, measured smile, and said, funny. I was about to suggest you reconsider yours. And that's when he finally looked up, really looked at me. Not like a judge, like a man who'd just realized he might have made a mistake. The ledger was still on the screen. I hadn't moved. Neither had he. Judge Sterling Marsh leaned back in his chair with that same smug weight he'd worn like a robe since I walked in. His eyes scanned the projection half-heartedly, then flicked back to me, brimming with contempt. A wire transfer, he drawled. How original. Is this your version of a smoking gun, Miss Langley? My fingers tightened around the remote. This discrepancy alone accounts for over $2 million in unapproved city funding, I said, and there are multiple transactions just like it. He chuckled. Not politely, not thoughtfully, mockingly. Do you always insist on drowning the court in paperwork, he said, or is this just your way of compensating? The word hung there, thick and deliberate. Compensating. A few people in the gallery murmured. A woman gasped. The defense attorney smirked without shame. He knew exactly what Marsh meant. They all did, and so did I. It wasn't just sexist. It wasn't just demeaning. It was racial. He didn't say the words out loud, but they didn't have to be spoken. The venom was in the delivery, the tone, the gleam in his eyes that dared me to lash out and make a scene. I didn't. Instead, I took a single breath, slow and measured, let it fill my lungs, ground my voice. Then I stepped forward. With all due respect, Your Honor, I'd like the record to reflect that the court has now referred to counsel's presentation of evidence as a form of personal compensation. You can put whatever you want in the record, he said flatly. Just don't expect the jury to find your pity party compelling. There it was again, another line, another shove. The tension in the courtroom was thick enough to bite through. A few jurors shifted uncomfortably. One woman, third row back, folded her arms tighter and narrowed her eyes. Not at me, but at him. I saw it. So did the reporters. That's the thing about power when it's abused in plain sight. It draws attention, even from those trained not to react. Sterling knew it too. That's why his voice hardened. Move on, Miss Langley, before I hold you in contempt for wasting time. I stared at him. Every eye in that room followed me, tracked my breath, my body language, the lines around my mouth. They weren't just wondering what evidence I had. They were wondering if I'd crack, if I'd break under pressure, if I'd become the angry black woman they'd been conditioned to fear. So I smiled, a small, quiet thing. Then I clicked to the next slide. This internal memo, I continued, was obtained through a subpoena to the city's Planning and Development Office. It shows the defendant's firm received direct budget authorizations without formal council approval for every project we've submitted. Sterling didn't even look at the screen. I said, move on. My voice didn't waver. This evidence supports a clear pattern of financial abuse. The same firm received triple its designated funding in 3 separate quarters. The transfers were signed off by enough, he barked. He slammed his gavel once. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. Miss Langley, I will not sit here while you attempt to build a conspiracy theory out of city spreadsheets. This is a courtroom, not cable news. He was shouting now, red-faced, shaking with the effort of keeping control. I glanced at the jury. The man in seat 6 looked stunned. The woman next to him mouthed something under her breath. Even the bailiff twitched, unsure whether to step in. Sterling had lost it, and he knew it, but I wasn't done. Your Honor, I said, the documents speak for themselves. The defendant's company received unapproved city funds. The paper trail connects to individuals in oversight positions. We're asking the court to consider the totality of... Are you implying criminal conduct by this court? He stood. Actually stood. Hands flat on the bench, eyes locked on mine. The room froze. I'm implying, I said calmly, that justice requires we follow the evidence, no matter where it leads. The silence afterward was suffocating. No coughs, no rustling papers, not even the scratch of a pen. Just the sound of a powerful man realizing, too late, that the rules he'd bent his whole career might finally be bending back. He stared at me like he wanted to devour me whole. Then, with a cold smile, he sank back into his seat and said, I see. So we're playing hardball. He looked toward the defense table. Counselor, are you as amused by this charade as I am? The defense attorney gave a practiced chuckle, but it didn't reach his eyes. He could feel the shift in the room, too. The story wasn't unfolding how they expected. It was unraveling. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. Because sometimes silence isn't surrender. It's strategy. I stepped back, returned to my table, and took a sip of water. My hand didn't shake. My breath didn't hitch. But deep inside, I could feel it. The turning point. He was rattled. He was cracking. And I was just getting started. That's when he leaned in, lowered his voice, and said, lips barely moving, You're walking into something bigger than you can handle, Miss Langley. He didn't say it for the record. He didn't say it for the courtroom. He said it for me, quiet, controlled, threatening. I didn't flinch. I just looked him dead in the eye and said, So were they, and I'm still standing. Then I turned away. But inside, I felt it. Not fear, not yet, but something colder. Like the air had changed. Like the floor beneath me had started to shift. Because that wasn't just a warning from a grumpy old judge with an attitude problem. That was a veiled threat, and it didn't come from nowhere. He knew something I wasn't supposed to find, and I'd just stepped on the edge of it. I sat back down at the plaintiff's table, every cell in my body on fire. The prosecution team next to me, 2 junior attorneys and a paralegal, glanced over, sensing the tension. Everything okay? One of them whispered. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The answer was in the silence, stretching across the courtroom like a trap. Judge Marsh leaned back again, straightened his robe, and said, voice dripping with condescension, Miss Langley, if you're finished pretending this is a courtroom drama, perhaps we can return to reality. I met his gaze. I'm presenting facts, Your Honor. The drama comes from your reaction. That earned a small gasp from somewhere in the gallery. The room had started to shift, not in chaos, but in focus. You could feel it. People leaning forward, watching him, watching me. Because this wasn't just about a case anymore. It was about the way he looked at me, talked to me, tried to strip my authority in front of strangers. And everyone could see it. Even the jury wasn't pretending to look away anymore. But Marsh wasn't finished. He waved toward the screen again. You've shown us numbers, lines on spreadsheets. You've told a story. But I have yet to see a single piece of evidence that justifies dragging this case through my courtroom. I stood slowly. Then maybe it's time to look closer, I said. I walked to the exhibit stand, opened a separate folder, and held up a copy of a contract. One with a familiar signature on it. This document, I said, projecting so every juror could hear, is a city infrastructure funding agreement between the planning board and the Wind Development Group. He didn't blink. I placed it beneath the projector. The signature was bold, unmistakable, Charles Wins. Then I placed a second document on top of it. This is an internal memo from the same office, marked confidential. It details an off-record budget increase, funneled directly into the same project, without counsel review. The numbers lit up on the screen, nearly triple the approved amount. I placed a third document next, and that's when I felt it. The shift. The courtroom didn't move, but Marsh did. A tiny twitch in his jaw, a flex of his fingers, barely visible, but to someone trained to watch, it screamed. Because the signature on the third document wasn't Wynn's. It was his, Judge Sterling Marsh. Right there, authorizing the transfer. I let it sit in the air like smoke. The gallery started murmuring. The defense attorney sat up straighter, his face no longer smug but tight, alert. Sterling didn't speak. He didn't need to. His silence said everything. I looked back at him. Your Honor, I said clearly, would you like to explain why your signature appears on an unauthorized financial transaction involving the defendant's company? A pin could have dropped. The reporters had stopped writing. One even raised their phone halfway, as if this moment might shatter reality. Sterling blinked. Just once. Then he spoke, voice low, measured. That document is inadmissible. I raised an eyebrow. Excuse me? It was obtained improperly. I'm ruling it out. That's not your decision to make without review. I've reviewed it. You haven't heard my argument. I don't need to. It's not coming into evidence. He was unraveling, fast. I took a step forward, calm and clear. This document was subpoenaed through the State Ethics Commission. He didn't move. Your Honor, with all due respect, you cannot rule against evidence just because it implicates someone close to you. That was the moment, the precise moment when the entire courtroom realized this wasn't bias, this wasn't attitude. This wasn't a judge having a bad day. This was a man trying to bury the truth, and he was running out of dirt. The defense attorney whispered something to his client. Wynn's face was pale now. His hand clutched the edge of the table like it might save him. Sterling's voice cracked, just slightly, when he spoke again. I'm ending this line of questioning. I didn't sit down. I didn't blink. I said, you're not just obstructing justice, Your Honor. You're participating in it. That hit like a fist. The jury reacted. The gallery reacted. Even the bailiff took a step forward. Sterling slammed his gavel again. You're out of line. I leaned in, my voice steady. No, sir. I'm exactly where the line is. You just crossed it. And as the echoes of the gavel faded, I reached into my case and pulled out something he wasn't ready for. A recorder. The recorder sat between us like a lit fuse. I didn't press play. Not yet. I just let it breathe. Let him look at it. Let him feel it. Let him guess what I had and how much of him lived inside it. Judge Sterling Marsh didn't move, but I saw the flicker in his eyes. That moment of calculation. The twitch of fight or flight. Like he'd just remembered something he thought he buried. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The room was already shifting. Reporters had stilled. Jurors leaned forward slightly, pretending not to. Sterling adjusted his robe, cleared his throat. Miss Langley, he said, voice tight but controlled, if this is some sort of stunt, I suggest you reconsider. I tilted my head. It's not a stunt. It's evidence, and I haven't even used it yet. He blinked, just once. His lips thinned, and for the first time since I entered this courtroom, he didn't have something smug to say. That silence was louder than any outburst. I placed both hands flat on the plaintiff's table, leaned forward slightly. This court deserves transparency, I said, not to him, but to the room. The people watching, everyone in this building, deserves to know whether the man behind the bench is upholding justice or helping to bury it. He flinched. A small one. But it was there, visible only to those who've been trained to watch powerful men come undone slowly. Then he smiled, not amused, not sarcastic, just tired. He leaned forward, his voice so low only I could hear it. Lips barely moving, tone surgically precise. Some fights aren't worth having, Miss Langley. It hit me like cold steel. Because it wasn't just a threat. It wasn't just condescension. It was regret and fear. Not of me, not of the law, but of what was already coming. That's when I knew. He wasn't just irritated by my presence. He wasn't just insulted by my competence. He wasn't just defending someone else. He was defending himself. He was part of it. Whatever it was, however deep it went, he wasn't just near the rot. He was the rot. And that whisper, it wasn't a warning. It was a confession. I sat back, slow and deliberate, eyes still on him. I could feel the prosecution team glancing at me from the side, sensing something had just cracked, but not knowing what. I didn't look at them. Didn't look at the jury. Didn't look at the gallery. Just him. Because in that moment, it wasn't about the show. It wasn't about the optics. It was just me and him, truth and power. and one of us was about to lose. I watched him shift in his seat again, adjust his robe for the third time in 5 minutes, tap one finger against the bench, once, then again, trying to regain control, trying to pretend he hadn't just given himself away. I could feel my pulse in my throat, steady and cold. No adrenaline, no panic, just precision. I reached slowly for the recorder and slid it an inch closer to me, still not pressing play, just making sure he saw it again, felt it, knew it was real. He didn't speak, didn't blink, but I caught it. One breath, sharp and shallow, like he'd been holding it without realizing. And that's when I understood exactly what was happening. This wasn't the beginning of a case. It was the beginning of a cover-up, unraveling. And I was sitting across from the man it was built to protect. He looked at me again, not with arrogance this time, not with disdain, but with something far more dangerous. A flicker of desperation. And that's when I knew he wasn't done trying to bury the truth. Yeah. I pressed play. No speech, no warning, just a single click, and the courtroom fell into absolute silence. Then his voice filled the room. Take care of it. I don't care how. It was unmistakable. Sterling Marsh, his voice, his cadence, his arrogance. Another pause, static, and then, make sure she doesn't get her hands on those ledgers. There it was. The mask ripped off in real time. You could feel it the moment the gallery realized what they were hearing. The shift wasn't loud. It was visceral, like air rushing out of a room too fast. The defense attorney froze. Charles Wynn stopped breathing. Even the jury, the ones sworn to impartiality, twitched, their eyes darting between me and the bench. But I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on him. Sterling didn't move, not at first. But I saw it, his lips parting slightly, the faintest flicker of panic across his features. Not guilt, not remorse, just exposure. I let the recording finish, just static now, and pressed stop. Then I said it, loud enough for the entire courtroom to hear. Now the court knows exactly what you're hiding. The sentence landed like a hammer. Sterling blinked, his jaw tensed. But he said nothing, because what could he say? I didn't give him room to recover. This recording was obtained through a legal wiretap, I continued, voice steady, unshaken. Issued as part of an ongoing investigation into public corruption by the State Ethics Commission. He finally spoke, but his voice cracked like something splintering inside him. This is inadmissible, he barked. This is entrapment. This is manufactured. No, Your Honor, I said, cutting him off. This is your voice. More murmurs from the gallery, reporters scribbling furiously. A young woman in the second row gasped and covered her mouth. A juror leaned forward, resting her elbow on her knee like she couldn't look away. Sterling gripped the edge of the bench. You've manipulated this court, he hissed. This entire proceeding. Tainted. You did that, I said, when you chose to protect a defendant instead of the people. His eyes narrowed. You think this changes anything? I stepped closer, just enough to make sure he heard every word. I think this is the beginning of everything changing. He slammed the gavel again, too fast, too desperate. This hearing is over. No, it isn't. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. Because now the entire room had seen him unravel. And not because I yelled, but because I stayed standing. He turned toward the bailiff. Clear the court. But the bailiff didn't move. Sterling pointed at me. She's out of line. Remove her from this courtroom. Still, no movement. Everyone was waiting, watching, and that terrified him more than anything. I turned slightly toward the gallery and held up another sheet of paper. A certified transcript, signed, sealed, and time-stamped. This, I said, is the official documentation confirming the recording you just heard was submitted into sealed evidence 2 weeks ago. It wasn't doctored. It wasn't leaked. It was protected. Until now. Sterling's face flushed deep red. He opened his mouth again, but this time no words came. Only breath, ragged and shallow. I walked back to the table, let the silence stretch just long enough. Then I looked back up. I have one more question, Your Honor. He didn't respond. I took a slow breath. Let it land. Was it worth it? His fingers clenched, his lips moved, but the words, whatever they were, never came out. Because when the lie breaks, it doesn't explode. It collapses. Quiet. Crushed under its own weight. I stepped back, returned to my seat. Let the room take it in. Everything had shifted now. The balance, the authority, the fear, and he knew it. He looked to the exit, and for the first time I saw it in his eyes. He wasn't thinking about the law anymore. He was thinking about escape. He looked like a man cornered, like he'd just realized the weight of the gavel in his hand wasn't enough anymore. Sterling Marsh stood behind the bench, fingers gripping the edge as if that alone would keep his world from collapsing. His eyes darted to the exit, then back to the recorder, then to me. And that's when he snapped. "This hearing is over." The words cracked through the air like broken glass. "I'm adjourning these proceedings effective immediately. Bailiff, clear the courtroom." His voice was louder than before, sharper, almost desperate, but no one moved. Not the bailiff, not the jury, not even the reporters. They were all waiting to see what I'd do, so I stood, deliberately, calmly. "No, Your Honor," I said. "You don't get to silence the court just because the evidence leads to you." He glared at me, his face red now. "You are out of order, Miss Langley." I took a step forward. "And you are out of time." That hit. Even the defense attorney flinched. Sterling's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Just a stammer, then silence. I turned to the bailiff. Officer Reynolds. He'd been standing in place for most of the trial like a statue, professional, impartial. But I could see it now. His jaw was clenched. "Officer," I said, loud enough for the room to hear, "I'm invoking emergency protective procedure under Judicial Ethics Code 14B. I'm requesting an immediate continuation of proceedings under supervisory review." Sterling slammed the gavel down hard. "You have no authority to request that." I didn't flinch. "And you have no authority left to deny it." It was quiet after that, the kind of quiet that feels like gravity shifting. Then, the back doors opened. 2 officers stepped into the courtroom, not rushing, not shouting, just walking with purpose. Sterling turned toward them. His posture stiffened. His breathing quickened. The gallery stirred. Reporters leaned forward in their seats. One camera clicked, even though no one had said a word. Sterling held up a hand. "This is an attack on the judiciary," he said, his voice trembling. "This is a political ambush. You are destroying the integrity of this court." He was unraveling in real time. I stayed rooted. "You did that the moment you tried to bury the truth," I said. He shook his head. "You have no idea what you're doing." "No," I said. "I know exactly what I'm doing." The officer stopped just short of the bench, and then one of them spoke, clear, calm, and loud enough for every single person in the courtroom to hear. "Judge Sterling Marsh," the officer said, "you are under arrest for obstruction of justice, conspiracy to commit fraud, and abuse of judicial authority." Sterling's face went pale. His hands twitched. His mouth opened. But nothing came, because there was no one left to talk over, no one left to silence, no system left to shield him. The courtroom didn't gasp. It breathed, as if it had been holding that moment in for years. I didn't move. I didn't speak. Because this wasn't my victory lap. This was just the reckoning. Sterling's eyes locked on the officers, and for one fleeting second, just one, he looked like he might run. Sterling Marsh, the man who had spent decades towering behind a bench, looked like he might make a run for it. His eyes flicked toward the side exit. His body shifted just an inch. The room froze. But he didn't move, because there was nowhere left to go. The officers stepped forward in unison, slow and methodical, not aggressive, not performative, just certain. The same kind of certainty I'd had when I hit play on that recorder, the same kind of certainty that brought him here. Sterling's arms stiffened at his sides as one officer reached for his wrist. He pulled away, not hard, just enough to prove, to himself maybe, that he still had some choice. "You're making a mistake," he muttered. "This is all going to fall apart." His voice wasn't booming now. It was cracked, small, like something hollow being tapped. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer began. Sterling exhaled, shoulders sagging. He didn't resist this time. Just let them turn him, his arms behind his back. The cuffs clicked into place, and that's when the room cracked open. Gasps, whispers, the sound of someone dropping a phone. One juror visibly recoiled, hand over their mouth. The court stenographer paused, eyes wide, fingers hovering above the keys. Even the defense attorney, who had kept his smirk all day, had gone ghost white. The gallery was no longer just watching a trial. They were witnessing a collapse. The once commanding figure behind the bench now stood in front of it, cuffed, silent, stripped of his authority by the very system he once controlled. Sterling Marsh, judge, powerbroker, untouchable, was now just another man being escorted out of his own courtroom. And I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. I just sat there, still, cold, steady. Because this wasn't satisfaction. It wasn't revenge. It was justice cutting through rot and leaving silence in its wake. He glanced back once, not at the jury, not at the officers, at me. There was no fury in his eyes, no fire, just disbelief, like he still couldn't understand how this had happened. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, and then, in a final, pitiful attempt at control, he said, "I am the law here." His voice shook. It didn't fill the room the way it used to. It barely made it past the front row. I stood slowly, buttoned my blazer, met his gaze. Not anymore. He didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. The officers guided him past the defense table, past the court reporter, past the stunned jurors who would carry this moment for the rest of their lives. Flashes from the press gallery lit up the room like lightning. The clatter of keyboards came back to life. But I didn't hear any of it. I watched him disappear through the side door, and then it was quiet again. Not the silence of fear, not the silence of shame. Something different. The kind of silence that comes after a storm. When people realized the power they believed in was never real to begin with. I turned slowly back to the table, aware that every eye in the room was still on me. But they weren't watching for weakness now. They were watching for what came next. The prosecution team was frozen behind me. One of them whispered, "Did that really just happen?" I didn't answer, because we weren't done. Sterling might have been the first domino, but he wasn't the last. This case, this courtroom, was still wide open, and so was the truth. I took a breath, cold and measured, and then I heard it. A chair scraping the floor, the slow shuffle of expensive shoes. I turned, and saw Charles Wynn rising to his feet. His face had changed. Gone was the smug detachment, the polished arrogance. What remained was something stripped bare. He wasn't pretending anymore. His eyes were wide, focused, terrified. He looked at me, voice shaking, and whispered, "I didn't know it would go this far." The words barely made it out of Charles Wynn's mouth. His voice was dry, shaky, almost inaudible under the hum of murmurs still rippling across the gallery. But I heard him. Everyone did. He stood there, the weight of his suit suddenly too heavy, his collar too tight, his mask slipping with every second that passed. This was the same man who entered the courtroom 3 days ago like it was a golf meeting, who winked at reporters, who smiled at the jury like he owned their mortgages. Now he looked like he hadn't taken a full breath since Sterling was cuffed. I didn't move. I let the silence press into him. He cleared his throat, tried to square his shoulders, but his hands trembled. I didn't ask him to do that, he said. I didn't tell him to cover anything up. I stepped forward slowly. You didn't have to, I said. He did it because he knew what he was protecting. Wynn swallowed hard. His eyes jumped between me, the jury box, and the gallery behind me, scanning for someone, anyone, who might step in. No one did. There were no more shields left. I have children, he said suddenly. I built jobs, communities. I've given more to the city than anyone in this courtroom. I tilted my head. And how much did you take? He didn't answer. I walked to the screen and tapped the final slide, the one with the off-record budget spikes, the one with his initials next to every shady transfer. I let the numbers speak for themselves. You funneled public funds into private contracts, paid off inspectors, ignored council approvals. And when someone tried to stop it, I turned back to him. You bought yourself a judge. Wynn took a step back. No, look, this isn't what you think. It's exactly what I think. He shook his head, desperate now. You don't understand how it works. These things. They've always been done like this. It's politics. It's leverage. I didn't blink. It's corruption. That word hit harder than the gavel ever could. He stopped talking. The courtroom watched, waiting. No one moved. No one interrupted. He let out a long, trembling breath, then looked at me. I want protection. There it was. The moment the mighty crumble, not from guilt, but from fear. I said nothing at first. Let him sit in it. You want protection, I repeated, my voice low. Then give me something that justifies it. He hesitated, sweat now visible at his temple. The courtroom's heat hadn't changed, but his world had. I can give you names, he said. Emails, meetings, offshore accounts. I didn't flinch. How many names? He looked at the floor, then back up. A lot. I crossed my arms. Start talking. His lips parted. His mouth moved. But then He looked toward the exit, then at the reporters, then back at me, and I could see it. The old instincts kicking in, the urge to spin, to bargain, to twist the truth just enough to protect what was left of his empire. So I cut him off before he even tried. Don't waste this moment, Mr. Wynn. You're not the puppet master anymore. You're just the last one standing. He stared at me, something in his eyes shifting. Maybe guilt, maybe survival, but definitely fear. He nodded once, and slowly sank back into his seat. The judge's bench stood empty now, and for the first time since this trial began, so did his confidence. As he leaned forward to speak again, voice low, he said, "There's a list, a real one, but you're not supposed to see it." Charles Wynn's words landed like a dropped weapon. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't bluffing, he was surrendering. The gallery had quieted again, but this time it wasn't out of shock. It was something colder. Anticipation. Because the monster they thought they'd seen, it had a longer shadow. I didn't move right away. I let the silence tighten around him. "A list," I repeated slowly. "Of what?" He looked up at me, and I saw it, finally, fully, the unraveling. "Of people," he said. "Judges, councilmen, contractors, lawyers. Some of them still working, some of them sitting on state boards right now. They all got a cut." He swallowed hard, like the names were burning on the way up. "It's not just this project," he added. "It goes back years, decades." I didn't blink. "Do you have proof?" He hesitated for a second too long. "Not all of it," he admitted, "but enough. If I give it to you, I need immunity. Full. I need protection. Witness relocation if possible." "You're not some innocent whistleblower," I said. "You're the architect." "I was a participant," he said quickly, "but I didn't build it. He stopped, corrected himself. "I just paid for it." A bitter laugh slipped out before I could stop it. I turned to the prosecution table. The room behind me buzzed, press whispering, phones lighting up, eyes locked on every word, but my mind was already racing. Because this wasn't just a corruption case anymore. This was a blueprint of institutional rot. And for the first time in my career, I realized something terrifying. This courtroom was never meant to hold the truth. I stepped forward again, calm, controlled. "If you have names," I said, "you write them. Every one." He nodded. "I want access to counsel," he said, "now." The bailiff signaled. Two attorneys from the public defender's office approached cautiously. One leaned down, began whispering to Wynn, who kept glancing back at me like I might vanish if he blinked too long. The jury sat stunned, the weight of what they were hearing still sinking in. I turned toward them. "You've witnessed something no one in this room was ever supposed to see," I said. "Not just a corrupt official, not just a compromised trial, but a system designed to shield itself from accountability." One juror, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes, nodded slightly, as if to say, "We see it now." The judge's bench sat empty behind me, that tall wooden throne suddenly looking absurd, hollow. Sterling was gone, but what he left behind was a map. And Wynn? He was pointing at every dot. 15 minutes later, I stood in the hallway outside the courtroom as agents from the Attorney General's office arrived with briefcases and guarded expressions. They swept past me without much acknowledgement, but I didn't need it. They weren't here because they cared. They were here because they were afraid. Wynn was already in a back room with state investigators. The courthouse had been sealed. Reporters surrounded the building. And inside that folder he handed over, 2 bank accounts offshore, 3 encrypted drives, and a typed list, names, titles, numbers, emails. One of them I recognized, a former mentor, someone who had vouched for me during my first internship. I stared at the name on the page and felt my throat tighten. This wasn't over, not even close. When I walked back into the courtroom, the energy had shifted. The jury was still seated, but the judge's chair remained empty. A temporary presiding judge would arrive by the hour, but the gavel hadn't moved, and I hoped it stayed that way. I stepped to the front and addressed the room. "Given the events of today," I said, "I am submitting a formal petition to the State Ethics Commission and the Department of Justice for an expanded investigation. Every name in that file will be reviewed." Reporters scribbled, some typed directly into live feeds. "This case isn't closing," I continued. "It's opening." The court clerk whispered something into the ear of one of the agents. They nodded, then turned to me. "Miss Langley," he said, "you'll be granted temporary clearance to continue questioning the witness under federal observation until we're ready to convene a grand jury." I nodded once, understood. I turned to Wynne, now seated in the witness box, his cufflinks gone, his tie loose, his ego stripped. "Mr. Wynne," I said, "let's go back to the beginning." He inhaled sharply and started talking. Names, cities, meetings, campaign donations, judicial favors, construction contracts with invisible amendments, backroom dinners. Each sentence was another crack in the dam, and the flood hadn't even begun. Then he paused, looked directly at me and said, "The scariest part is, some of them aren't afraid of getting caught, because they still believe they can't be." Wynn's voice cracked on that last sentence, and for a man who once towered over boardrooms, politicians, and city councils, he looked small now, shrinking inside the witness box. But what hit me most wasn't his fear, it was the brutal truth behind it. Because he was right. There were still people out there, untouched, unbothered, who watched the fall of Judge Sterling Marsh and still thought, that won't be me. Even now, even after everything, they were counting on silence, on distraction, on people forgetting. But I wasn't going to let that happen. Not this time. I closed my notebook, stood slowly, and faced the room. Reporters leaned forward. Jurors, though technically released from deliberation, remained glued to their seats. The gallery had shifted from observers to believers, and the weight of what we'd uncovered hung heavy in the air. The case of State v. Wynne, I said clearly, was never about one developer, one bribe, one corrupt judge. I turned slightly, eyes moving from the empty bench to the pages on my table. It was about the machine, the kind that doesn't need to hide anymore, because it's been allowed to exist in plain sight. A few heads nodded, quietly, like people remembering something they once forgot they believed in. Wynne stared at the floor, his hands clenched in his lap. He had given us enough to burn down the city twice over, but this wasn't about revenge. This was about prevention, exposure, consequences, and none of it would matter unless it changed something. I stepped forward, let the moment breathe. Judge Marsh wasn't just compromised, he was a pillar, one of many. And when pillars rot, they don't just fall. They take everything resting on them down, too. I paused, letting the truth settle into the bones of the courtroom. That includes state contracts, judicial appointments, budget approvals, housing permits, and every marginalized community that was denied access, protection, or funding because someone in power was playing king behind closed doors. No one interrupted, no one could, because the silence in that room wasn't just reverence anymore. It was shame, collective, unspoken, but felt, by those who had known, by those who had benefited, by those who had looked the other way. I walked back to my table, stacked the exhibits into a single folder, and handed it to one of the federal agents who had arrived mid-testimony. He looked at me uncertain. "Do you want to deliver this yourself?" I shook my head. "I've done my part, and I meant that. Because this case, it had cost more than I wanted to admit. The hours, the threats, the invisible grinding weight of having to be perfect, calm, articulate, while everything inside me wanted to scream. But the job was never about comfort. It was about confrontation. And I'd confronted the system from the inside out. As the courtroom emptied, I stood for a moment at the center of the floor, letting the space breathe without Sterling, without Wynne, without shadows. And I remembered the girl I used to be, sitting in the back of a courtroom, notebook in hand, watching white men call each other Your Honor while women like my mother were called liars or hysterical for asking to be heard. That girl had dreamed of wearing the blazer, standing at the front, having the mic. But not like this. Not to uncover a disease eating through the foundation. Still, here I was. And I had done what they said couldn't be done. The door opened. A crowd had gathered outside. Reporters, protesters, local residents, some holding signs, some holding each other, some just standing still, waiting for something they'd never seen before. Me, a black woman in a power suit, walking out of that courtroom like the system hadn't broken her. Because it hadn't. It had tried, but it failed. As I stepped through the door, a reporter shouted a question. "Miss Langley, do you believe justice was served today?" I stopped, took a breath, then turned to face them all. "No," I said, "not yet." The cameras clicked, because they knew what was coming. I scanned the crowd, eyes locking with people who had been waiting their whole lives for the system to crack just enough to let the light in. And then I said it. This wasn't justice served, this was justice reclaimed. Their silence was louder than any cheer, Because, for once, they didn't need to clap. They just needed to believe. And as I turned and walked down the steps of the courthouse, blazer catching the wind, eyes forward, I didn't feel like I'd won. I felt like I'd started something, and I wasn't stopping anytime soon. There's a moment in every life where silence becomes unbearable, and truth demands a voice. As I finished watching Asha Langley's story unfold, I sat still for a long time, not out of shock, but out of clarity. This wasn't just a courtroom drama, it was a mirror. A reminder of how power bends the rules, and how those rules aren't written for everyone. Asha didn't just stand up to one corrupt judge, she stood up to a system designed to erase her, to dismiss her, to silence her. And in doing so, she forced us all to ask the question, how many more are still sitting behind that bench, protected by their robes and arrogance, believing they are untouchable? Her strength wasn't in the evidence. It was in her refusal to flinch. Her power wasn't in the words she said. It was in the silence she owned. For those of us who have ever been told to stay quiet, know your place, or play it safe, this story is a beacon. A reminder that standing alone doesn't mean standing powerless. Justice doesn't always come with fanfare. Sometimes it walks in quiet, dressed in defiance, speaking truth with a steady voice. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't just bring accountability, it brings hope. Let this story spark conversation, reflection, action. This story is a fictionalized account intended for educational and entertainment purposes only. It is not meant to target or accuse any real-life individual, judge, attorney, or institution. The goal is to highlight systemic challenges and inspire discussion around justice, equity, and accountability. If this story moved you, drop a comment below. Hit the like button if you believe in standing up to corruption. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that speak truth to power. Because silence is easy, but courage changes everything. Thank you for watching this video, wishing you a peaceful day, and see you in the next one.